only amounts to a normal level of hardship that is to be expected when a person is deported from the United States. So to prove extreme hardship, a married couple would have to show something more. For example, that the U.S. citizen spouse has physical or mental health issues, or their children do, or there are other things that take their case, their particular situation, out of the ordinary level of suffering. That's how hard it is for most dreamers to get legal. For most of them, it's just not an option. Now, I regularly read or hear commentary along the lines of, well, they've been in the country for so long, so they've had time to get their papers in order. But that's simply not true. The passage of time does nothing to create more options. Good character and a strong work ethic don't either. The law really is that draconian. And that's why the immigration issues that we face in our country, in our region right now, are not so simple. To come to the US and live and work here, a foreign citizen needs to fit into one of those categories set forth in the law. It's not simply enough to simply desire to live in the US and contribute to US society. You must fall into a specific category. You better hope that the numeric quota for that category has not been filled up, and you also must not be deportable or inadmissible, which most people who entered without permission are, by definition. Now, there are a few provisions in our immigration laws that provide some hope for undocumented people. I already mentioned the extreme hardship waiver process. There are also visa options for persons who were victims of human trafficking or other criminal activity here in the US, or who may have a viable claim for refugee status. But each of these cases, each of these types of cases is very burdensome and requires the applicant to meet very stringent criteria. Virtually none of them can be done successfully without the help of an attorney, and most people who would qualify for these visas cannot afford an attorney. So we also have an access to justice problem here too. To wrap up, just a few more interesting numbers. About 40% of undocumented persons in the US entered by land. The other 60% of undocumented persons entered with a visa or other permission, and then they overstayed. So that should give us an idea of how effective building a wall along the border is going to be. It's going to be about 40% effective. So it also tells us that for approximately 5 million people currently living in the US, there is virtually no path towards lawful status. And I'm not even talking about citizenship here, I'm just talking about any immigration status. But there is an important point that I'd like to make. Even if a person is undocumented, regardless of how he or she entered the United States, that person may still be eligible for immigration benefits. They still have certain rights that they can take to court, so to speak. So let me talk to you very briefly, and then I'll pass the torch, about cancellation of removal. Let's say that an undocumented immigrant has been living in the US for years, and then one day they're caught by a federal immigration officer during a raid. In most cases, before he or she is deported, that immigrant is entitled to the due process protections of our Constitution, and therefore is entitled to a hearing in front of an immigration judge. Before or during that hearing, that undocumented immigrant may apply for immigration benefits, assuming, of course, that they're eligible to be considered for such a benefit. For example, a person who has been here for more than 10 years, who has a clean criminal record, and whose US citizen relatives would suffer extreme hardship if deportation occurred, may ask the judge to cancel the deportation and allow them to stay in the US and be here with a work permit. And I guess that illustrates how crazy immigration law really is. Sometimes the only way a person can apply for a certain benefit, in this case a work permit, is if they first get caught. And then when they've been detained for several weeks or months, they can ask for an immigration judge to cancel their deportation and grant them permission to stay. They couldn't have done that affirmatively. They literally had to be in trouble first and go through the entire stress of that process. In any case, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that any person who is physically present in the United States has certain constitutional rights. Those constitutional rights exist to protect individuals, whether they're U.S. citizens or not, from government abuse and overreach. And in part because of those constitutional tenets, it's arguable that the federal government does not have the logistical capacity to deport 12 million people who are here unlawfully, once you factor in all the detention and the court costs and the sheer time that would be spent doing so. And even if the federal government was able to carry out its goal of enforcing federal immigration laws to their extreme, the consequence is not what I would personally describe as desirable. We're literally going to be tearing apart hundreds of thousands of families by deporting adult parents whose minor children are U.S. citizens by birthright. Now, if any of you have a background in child development, you can probably see how doing this would lead to some pretty bad outcomes. So in my personal view, it's just not in the best interests of our society to effectively destroy families, but each of you can reach your own conclusions about that. Now, I just grazed by the topic of immigration law, so in the interest of time and my lungs and throat, I'm going to stop here, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions that you may have during Q&A. Thank you.
Andy, would you like to come up to the podium? Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. It was very informative for me as well. So as you heard before, my name is Andy Fless, and I am a farmer here in Leelanau County. I've worked in both counties over the years, and I guess I'm just here to kind of give you a grower's perspective on the importance of labor to us and to you and to all of us that live here. So I work at Shady Lane Cellars. We do wine grapes. I've worked cherries over the years as well, and these can be quite seasonal positions. So we employ varying numbers, 6 to 12 field laborers throughout the year, and you know we verify and all our employees. The majority of people that I've come across over the years have been what I would describe as good family people. They came here to gain employment, to escape something that was not a good life, whichever country they may have come from. And I work with people from several different countries. And so, you know, my impression is these people are here, they came here for a job, that's all they want for their family is to work hard, and raise their children. And many of them have children that were born here, which tugs at the heartstrings a little bit to the point, some of the points that Marco was making. You know, when we have kind of these blended families, of blended status families, maybe, if you will, it can get pretty messy. And I think the climate has kind of heated up a little bit. And I think a lot of them are confused and maybe a little worried as well. You know, this is pretty big stuff. This is life. This is not just money. So it's difficult for us to, some of us, I guess, it's difficult for some of us to latch on to some of the government programs that provide labor. You know, that's one of the big arguments is, hey, why don't you just use H-2A? That's the miracle solution that the government has provided us. And, you know, I think in some cases it has a place. You know, it's giving jobs to people that want to come here and work, and so they're able to make a wage and perhaps send that home and help out and it helps the grower here get the desperately needed labor. If they're turning to that, they probably have nowhere else to turn. They're getting that labor, and they're making it through the season, and they're gonna make it through the next season if the H-2A worked out okay for them, I guess. It's not so easy for everyone to do that. It's pretty expensive, from what I heard, and I'm not here to talk to you about H-2A. You're gonna have to talk to another grower about that. We don't use it, and I don't know the ins and outs. I know what I've heard from other people and friends and colleagues that have experience with it. My experience with it is that it's pretty expensive. It's hard for us to dish out that cost in addition to all the taxes that we have to pay on it. And to me, it's a way of the federal government getting an extra tax and extra fees on top of the labor tax that we're paying. And there's a whole boatload of other moral arguments as to how we're just renting labor like that. And I'll leave that up to you to decide how you feel about it. So the last, let's see, I joined Shady Lane in 2013. In the last 6 years, we've seen, our labor situation fluctuate from just getting by to desperately understaffed. How are we going to make it through this year? To, okay, we're finally kind of in a good place, but when you get to that good place, you also kind of have this feeling of, well, now what's going to happen? What could happen next? Am I going to lose my best employee? Are they going to just vanish one day? Or 2 or 3 of them, if they're driving in the same car or if they're living in the same house, are they just going to vanish? And, it's not just I'm losing an employee, but these are good people. I'm proud to work with them, and I know their kids, and it's hard to understand that when you see someone or you read a headline and it's well, this person was picked up because they're illegal, or they did this illegal, or they did that illegal, and illegal. It's really easy for us, right? I mean, we're very privileged. Most of us, I'm imagining, are well, comfortable enough. It's really easy for us to kind of point the finger and, you're illegal, you're doing this wrong, and I know we're not supposed to get political here, but I guess I would ask you to maybe reconsider on how fair that might really be. So, I guess I'm probably starting to ramble. I'm happy to take plenty of questions if you have specific questions for the importance of labor in agriculture in general. Not just wine grapes or not just cherries, but just, the day-to-day, how important having those hands out in the field every day, and these are long days and hot days. How many of you were outside for 10 hours today in the sun? Anybody? Nobody's raising their hands? So it's not always easy, and to have people that want to do that, and they want to show up every day and be the ones that are picking your tomatoes or your apples and lettuce, and there's people from all nationalities that do this. I think it's pretty valuable, and I think we really need to consider the cost of that, and what is the cost going to be if we have to start paying domestic-only people to do that, because, I'm not knocking down the door to hire every high schooler around here to come work on my farm and keep after them all the time. And I think it would be a very different work environment for me and for them. And I think we would probably see our cost of production rise a little bit. And it doesn't seem like a solution to me at all. So happy to take any questions later. Thanks.
Marshall, I want to make a comment before Marshall comes up. Oh, here's your board. Thank you very much. In 2016, 2 members of our Farm Labor Task Force, myself and Christy Bardenhagen, were asked to participate in a meeting with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, area law enforcement, and representatives of local agencies, as well as other concerned individuals, for the purpose of discussing issues regarding our area immigrant community. I wonder now if that was the beginning of the formation of ALPACT in our community, but we were very grateful to be included in that discussion. And we thank you for coming to explain this fairly new organization to us. Thank you.
So I'm Marshall Collins. I live in Leelanau County. I live in Elmwood Township, Traverse City. I was born in Northport, Michigan. My parents first came here in the late 60s as migrant workers also. And we worked the cherry orchards and whatever else they could. I was the youngest of 8, so a lot of farmers were happy to see us. And we traveled back and forth from Florida. Once that stuff we just got rid of came, we left. And so we went to Florida and we did some migrant work there. And then in 1991, my parents decided to stay year round. My dad was also a pastor, so he got a pastoring job. I probably stopped doing migrant work probably around the age of 12 or 13, but at that time also we were still living in pickers' quarters ourselves, and so living conditions weren't great, but that's where we had a place to lay our head. And I graduated from Northport, went on to Concordia College, came back, taught at Northport. Now I work at the ISD, and just a year and a half ago, I became a member of the ALPACT, which is Advocates and Leaders for Police and Community Trust. They asked me to be one of the co-chairs of there along with Chief O'Brien. So I said yes, and I think that's what kind of ended me up here in front of a camera
Yes,
and all of you
it
guys. But what put me in that the role I am is after the election I had a brief encounter with an off-duty police officer. It wasn't anything physical, more of verbal, and the police officer decided to step down. And I was invited in by Chief O'Brien just to talk and see where I was coming from, see where he was coming from, and we actually became pretty good friends. He told me good luck today as I was walking in here. So yeah, and so with the ALPACT, it's basically community members. Some local, businesses also. I think we have TBAISD, TCAPS, representatives from Up North Live, retired community members, pastors from around the area. Missing anybody?
Law enforcement?
Law enforcement, huge piece. We have the law enforcement pieces there, and we try to keep it half and half. And we have invited pretty much all law enforcement in our area from Cadillac, Benzie, Traverse City, Petoskey, Charlevoix, so this whole northwest corner. Everyone has been invited to attend. We've had some pretty good meetings where we have discussed immigration, we have discussed racial profiling, we have discussed mental health. Like I said, we've discussed it. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. It's just a discussion, just like we're having here, on the steps that we can do to help improve the relationship between the community and the police officers. And one of the things that I try to get across to them is, because we're talking about trust, is I'm gonna tell you my age. I'll be 42 this year, and even after that incident, it was like, it's still hard to trust, because just like there's good and bad people out there, there's good and bad police officers out there also. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. And so, like, the discussion I have is that I will have to have a discussion with my kids on what to do when you get pulled over. Keep your hands on the steering wheel, don't reach for anything, and, you know, how many other people will have to have that discussion with their kids? You know, it's, you know, when we read about people getting shot in their cars or whatever, it's people who look like me, people who are tan, you know, that's what we read about. And what I do enjoy about All-Pact is I get to hear from the officers. I get to hear about them going into a heightened stance, or when they have to go into something. And, you know, I couldn't imagine myself, you know, having to go into something like that, especially, you know, having kids and thinking someone is going to shoot at me or shoot, you know, to kill me, whatever. So it comes from both sides. But, you know, our main thing is that we want to make sure that we have that open gate to talk to police officers, and police officers take to heart what the community is bringing to them, and that officers can talk to the community and, you know, let them know what they're doing to improve the relationship between police officers and community, because, you know, that's the important piece, is being able to have that trust, being able to have that open conversation between the officers and the community. And for me, that's key, because in order for our world to get better, we have to understand where each person is coming from. And All-Pact, I believe, is opening that discussion for that. And, you know, we have pretty good open dialogue about it. So I think.
Can I make a couple of points that relate directly to what you were
Yeah.
mentioning? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do I just hold it? Oh, it works. This is magical. Okay, I just wanted to make a couple of quick points that kind of bring together, you know, the issue of trust in law enforcement and the immigration issues that we have right now. So I mentioned just in briefing that there are some situations in which a person who is here, even without any immigration status, can actually apply for status based on the fact that they were maybe a victim of human trafficking or another type of crime, a qualifying crime. Those are situations in which Congress made a decision, and then they decided it's best for us to give status, to give visas to someone who is here unlawfully, who maybe broke our immigration laws and is here unlawfully, but they're coming forward and they're talking to our law enforcement and they're helping our law enforcement prosecute these really bad crimes that are much worse than somebody just crossing the border. So if a woman is a victim of domestic violence, even if she has no lawful status, she might, if she calls the police and she helps in the investigation and prosecution of that crime, she may actually be eligible for something called a U visa. And there are other situations that are like that. So the issue becomes, if that woman or that victim does not trust the police enough to call and say, I have been battered, or I've been a victim of this or that, and they're afraid that the police is just going to come and get them and maybe not respect their constitutional rights and maybe turn them over to immigration, then we kind of have a breakdown of the system that we're trying to employ. We have a breakdown of the values that we're trying to promote here. Another situation where law enforcement, especially local and state law enforcement, becomes an issue when it comes to immigration is when somebody is pulled over and perhaps there's a passenger in the car who looks like they're not a U.S. citizen. Okay, we know that racial profiling is an issue, and it's and anecdotally, just based on talking to current or past clients, In a nearby county here, I had a client who recently told me that the driver in the car was a U.S. citizen, but the passenger was not and did not have any documentation. They were undocumented. They were pulled over for some basic reason, I don't know, crossing the yellow line, whatever it was. Whatever it was, they were pulled over by an officer because the officer had reason to believe, they had probable cause to believe that perhaps the driver committed an infraction, not the passenger. Okay? So, and then, much to their despair, or at least the passenger's despair, the officer started inquiring about the immigration status of everyone in the car. Okay, and you can't do that. That's a constitutional violation, because you can't just detain a person. You can't stop a person unless you have probable cause to believe that they committed a crime. And being a passenger in a car that has been stopped for some traffic violation is not that. Fortunately, in that case, the people in the car had the presence of mind to basically say, I'm going to call my attorney about this, and then as soon as they said that, the police officer backed off and eventually let them go and let go of the immigration issue. But this is something, this anecdote is from Benzie County, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happened in Leelanau County and in other places here in northern Michigan. So that's something that inspires fear in our immigrant community, inspires fear in the workers who are trying to just come here and do their jobs and earn a living, even if they're not doing absolutely anything wrong. So that's my quick point. Thanks.
We are going to go.
Oh.
Excuse me.
That was your mic.
Yes. We are going to go to further questions, but Marshall, would you please speak to the fact that one of your most recent meetings was about immigration and what was discussed? Were you present at that meeting and what
Yes.
was discussed?
Yes.
On that immigration and law enforcement, if you could tell us.
We had the All-Pact had a meeting, and there was a discussion with someone from ICE, a representative from ICE, and also, I think his name is Ruby Johnson. He's the Michigan, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
The Michigan attorney for immigration law. Did I get it right? Something?
I can't remember the name of the organization, but he's a really, really smart guy.
Yeah, he was, and he was on point the way he talked about immigration. I mean, I left there feeling like I could have listened to him talk for another hour with all the information that he had and some of the things that, I didn't understand. He made the law a little bit clearer, kind of like listening to,
Marcelo.
I play soccer with him.
Yeah. But you don't show up at games, so.
I will, one of these days.
Okay.
Kind of like what Marcelo did today, and actually it was a little bit different. What Marcelo did today was it was another eye-opening experience on how difficult our laws are set up, and I was just sitting there thinking, we got some smart people up there, and I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm just joking. I felt like I was in an episode of Lost or something, just like, come on, can't we figure this thing out? So, that's around what the discussion was. It was just, for me, it was another like immigration 101, kind of really getting an understanding better of what it was. And I think the ICE speaker was she didn't say too much afterwards.
Just a quick point, I have, there it is again. I have talked to Sheriff O'Brien about the policy they have implemented in Grand Traverse County, and they seem to be taking a very lawful approach to it. So there are, and again, not endorsing or telling you to not endorse anyone, but because the topic of immigration is very much in the news, it's also very much in political campaigns right now. So I would encourage everyone, especially when deciding who to vote for, sheriff or other law enforcement related positions, but really just about anyone. See if their position is consistent with the Constitution, not just based on them saying, I'm a constitutional sheriff or I'm just trying to enforce our laws. See if they actually